So this is our third installment of kind of like helping you all throughout the application process. So today we'll be talking about ERAS and personal statements. As some of you all may know, I'm Ryan. I'm currently a third year family med resident at Lawrence Family Medicine Residency in Massachusetts. I've had one of my co-residents on, as well as one of my mentors that helped me a lot when I was applying for residency. So she's amazing. So I'll let each of them introduce themselves. Sumana or Dr. Lee, you want to go first?
So my name is Somana. I think I was here last time, so maybe you guys will recognize me. Yeah, like Ryan said, I'm a fourth year resident. I don't really know if there's anything else. I think that's it.
Dr. Lee?
I'm Amy Lee. I am a community faculty member at the Lawrence Residency, and then mostly I teach at the medical school at Tufts. And one of my most favorite jobs there is helping our students who are applying to residency in family medicine.
All right. So we'll start off with just kind of a check-in and see how people are doing. So when we were kind of thinking about when we should have our next session, people wanted to have like some time to digest after national conference. So I could just kind of want to hear from you all about how you all feel about it. Some people might have mixed feelings, so you can unmute yourself and maybe just chime in about how you all felt about it, what maybe some things you learned, or how you're feeling about the application process.
Hi, I'm Brianna, fourth year at Upstate. So I was looking forward to going to the conference in person, but I do think that the virtual conference was better than nothing. It was a little weird having like the exhibitor room and like the chat function, the drop your business card, but I definitely was able to talk to some program directors and talk to some residents at future programs that I'm interested in applying to. So it definitely was very helpful. And like even some of the program directors like reached out to me. So it was nice to at least get my foot somewhat in the door and know that, you know, they're looking for like diversity within their programs, because that was something that I definitely like kept reinforcing, and they definitely reached out. So it was good. It was better than nothing.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it was different as someone who was kind of on the other side, as I was also boothing for my residency and thinking about my own experience. So we were all figuring it out together, but we still really had some great conversations. I definitely agree.
Hi, I'm Elsa. I'm a fourth year medical student at Rocky Vista University College of Osteopathic Medicine. I enjoyed it. It left me confused still. Like I felt like I was able to portray myself, which is a good thing. But I couldn't really tell if I could fit with them, if that makes any sense. Like I could tell some residents enjoy talking to me, we vibe well, which was good. But that is still one of my fears, that I'm like, okay, I can get this foundation of knowledge in a lot of places and enjoy my time in a lot of places, but I still couldn't really determine fit, which was so confused. I mean, it helped me in knocking off some programs because like that room's dry. I don't want to but yeah.
The one thing I will say about like, I think it's going to be harder this year because you're not going to actually be able to visit places in person. But I think a lot of programs, including us, are trying to make like the actual interview like day, whatever that looks like, so you guys get more of a feel of the program and the residents. And I honestly feel like when I went to national conference, I was like, okay, I'm generally interested in these programs. So I applied to them. And I didn't really get a feel for them until my interview day. And I feel like that's when you kind of are like really like, okay, this program's really cool. I fit in with the people here. Okay, this program's less cool. The residents were eh. And I really think it's kind of, it's really when you interview at the place where you really figure out if they're your people. And that's what I felt when I interviewed at Lawrence. So I think don't feel discouraged if you weren't like completely like, I have my top 10 right now, right? Like, I think it's okay if you don't have that. I think it's more to help you narrow down your list and then kind of guide where you want to submit your application. And then when you interview at places, I think that's where you really make your list.
I definitely agree with that. Anyone learn anything interesting, like in any of the sessions? I know they had a few sessions about personal statement and CVs and such.
Or do you have like questions about programs, the way to think about programs?
To be honest, I didn't go to any sessions. One thing that kind of was more difficult than I thought, since some places just had a huge Zoom room, it was like I had to wait my turn to talk. So I felt like I was in rooms longer than I wanted to, just because I had a question and another person was talking and it was that weird lag. So, but I didn't get a chance to see any sessions.
Yeah, when I went in person, I didn't go to any sessions like that. I went to like maybe like 2. But otherwise, I mostly stayed in the expo. So
Me too. I didn't really go to any sessions. So
anybody have anything else to add?
I do think it was like useful that you could have one-on-ones with the program director in a little bit quieter. Like overall, I definitely prefer the in-person conference, but like it was definitely easier to have a more intimate conversation with either residents or with program directors or whatever than in the expo hall usually, because at least for me, like the expo hall is, because there's like thousands of people in there and it's really pretty rowdy. It's like it was easier to kind of like dig deep into topics. But yeah, I don't know. It was worth it. It was hard to not do the sessions because I'm normally so wonky and love the sessions and stuff. But yeah, I had to just like say, no, I must be like a one-track mind this year.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, Adrian. That it's great that they're also available because typically, when you go to a conference in person, like if you didn't go, like that was it. So you guys can still watch them. I know they're supposed to be up for about 30 days. And then you also mentioned business cards. I feel like every program is doing something different. And I feel like at Lawrence, we honestly have not like decided how we're gonna utilize business cards. So like one suggestion I would have is like reaching out directly with like a email to either someone that you connected well with or the program director if there are like follow-up questions that you have, because like I said, there's just gonna be variety in how like different programs use the business cards or don't use the business cards. So that's one thing to say about that. And yes, Anita Ravi's presentation was amazing. I like tweeted about that and I added her to my Twitter page. All right. So if no one else has any other additions, I'm going to ask a question and it's a poll. So if you guys can answer the poll, I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So it should be up now. And this is just kind of like having a preliminary residency list. It doesn't mean that it's your final list, but just the preliminary. Yeah, sorry, I put final list there. I meant like a final, like a first draft residency list. Yeah. Because you can always change your residency list into the time that you submit. I think you can also add programs afterwards too. So, all right, I want to go ahead and close it. So I'm going to share those results. So most people are kind of figuring out where they're applying to, thinking about different programs. So last time we talked about like, just kind of like how to come up with that list. And so like Expo is just one tool of figuring that out. And I think I may have mentioned this last time, but like if there are people that you connected well with, that you felt that they had similar interests to you, like don't feel bad about like also asking like, hey, like we just say like I feel like we have similar like interests. What are some other programs that you considered that maybe had the same uh kind of principles or interests that you were interested in, because that could kind of help, you know, feed other programs that you might want to consider, and talking with your deans about, you know, other programs that they think that might be fit. But like I said, you have until, you know, when it's time to submit, and you can also like add on others afterwards too. So I'm gonna stop sharing that. And then the other question that I had was in relation to letter recommendations, because I know we talked about that last time also. So I'm gonna ask, how many people have you asked for a letter recommendation? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close that. So these were the results. So a few people still kind of thinking about maybe who they're going to be asking for recommendations, but a few people, it seems like a majority have kind of gotten started. So that's good. Typically, you know, we kind of talked about this last time also, like the average is kind of about 3 letters of recommendations. Sometimes if you're in a dual degree program or in like a research focused program, oh, sorry. I thought I was sharing them. Can you see them now? Okay. Um, you may have more like 4. So, and you don't always have to use all of your letters. And then there's also a way in ERAS to kind of dedicate which letters you want to send also. All right. Any questions about these 2 things or thoughts about them or?
I kind of have a question. I've asked it a lot of different places about who I want to get my letters from. Do you think it would be a good idea to, of course, like, make it a little more, like, not all family people? Like, if I did a family doctor, or maybe like 2 family doctors, like one that knows me clinically and then one that knows me more, I guess, like academically, and then maybe just out of a different field. Like I thought about like my OB. Like would it be better to have all family or to have like a variety?
Yeah.
Of course, like if they're all good letters, you know.
That's Dr. Lee, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I would recommend that you have at least 1 letter from a family doctor and maximum 2 letters from a family doctor, but not 0 and not 3 or 4.
Okay.
It's not cool. So yeah, and so the other 1 or 2 letters should be from anybody you worked with clinically who you feel knows you well. And ideally, all the letters should actually be clinical letters, people you worked with clinically, with the exception of someone who is doing a dual degree program. Then they could have a 4th letter that's from, say, their dual degree program. So that might not be clinical. But mostly programs are looking for clinical letters talking about, you know, being able to comment on clinical experience and clinical kind of knowledge and competency, all those kinds of things. That's usually the most helpful type of letter.
Okay, I do want to kind of just follow up. I'm not going to take too much time, guys. But what if, like, there is someone I've been considering that doesn't know me clinically, but he worked in my school, and he's pretty, like, well-known, like, nationally. So, you know, it's, like, somebody that people might recognize. Would that benefit or be a good idea to go with that, even though he doesn't know me clinically, or just stick with, you know, all clinical?
Yeah, so I usually tell my students that the fame of the letter writer actually doesn't mean it's not helpful. And actually a lot of students have been told by our dean, you know, in other medical schools, that they should have a letter, for example, from their department chair. But almost none of our students have worked clinically with our department chair. So they're like, no, don't get a letter from the department chair, or try to get a letter from someone who you think might be famous, but who doesn't know you well clinically, because really the programs just want to know, like, hey, I worked with this student was amazing. Here's some examples of the kind of things we did together. And I can say they're going to be an awesome resident. Like that's what people want to know.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if Ryan or Sumina, you have a different opinion, which could be, you know, as far as a more famous letter writer or someone non-clinical.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Agreed. There were a few questions in the chat regarding letters about COVID and some people being busy and like kind of this awkward feeling of not wanting to bother them. I remember feeling that way, and someone told me that, you know, for the most part, teaching, like attendings that are like teaching, they like know that this is coming, especially around this time. And it was just kind of like, just think of it, they know that this is part of the job, so don't feel bad about it. I think this is why we kind of are saying to act early so that they have time to do it. You want to give them at least a month or so to kind of write the letter. So that's why it would be ideal to like act now, honestly. And then, you know, maybe at the 2-week mark, you can like touch base. And then once it gets to like the 1 week, you can kind of say, hey, like, you know, as a reminder. Or you can, you know, simply like say, is there additional information that you need to complete the letter? I kind of wanted to see what the status of the letter is, or I wanted to make sure that you received the email from ERAS, so that you can just kind of ask about that, and you'll be able to see when they submitted it or not on ERAS. So don't be afraid to ask. The one key is to ask early. So Dr. Lee, could you answer the question from Adrian? She said that she had been planning on getting a third letter from a clinical rotation that she was doing over the summer. But of course that fell through because of COVID. And now she's thinking about getting from a department chair. But she hadn't worked with them clinically.
Yeah, so everyone on the other hand understands this is a weird COVID year. And so, you know, it's okay if things aren't totally optimal because of COVID. So different schools stopped clinical rotations at different times or restarted them. And so if you're thinking about a letter that's kind of, say, a faculty member in the department or a department chair, you might put them in touch with other people you worked with clinically to say, I know you're putting together a letter, kind of a summary of, you know, how you know me and different things I've done, but here are some people I've worked with clinically, other people who aren't writing letters for you. Maybe you only spent a short time with them, or maybe you did some clinical work with them in a first or second year course. And you could say, you know, here are people I've worked with clinically in case you want to talk with them or ask them to give any input for the letter. And that could be helpful. Basically, anything you can do to make it easier for your letter writer will increase the chance of a better letter. So if you can give suggestions of who people could talk to, or give some instances of, you know, remember, here's when we worked together, and I remember when we saw this patient and we did this procedure together, how amazing that was. And just these little anecdotes, it makes it a lot easier for your letter writer to remember you and then say like, oh, that was amazing. I'm going to put that in my letter right now. So any of those things actually are super helpful for your faculty.
And then Asia, what questions did you have?
Okay, sorry. I just feel like I wasn't gonna be able to type it well, but also like is there a difference if you find somebody that's like super experienced? They're like, oh, I've been a doctor for 90 years, and I know they'll be a great resident, versus the person who's like fresh out of residency that I've rotated with. It's like, yeah, I know they'll be a great resident. That was my other part of the question.
As being a resident who's like read applications, I can tell you I spend zero amount of time being like, has this person worked in the field for 90 years versus has this person worked in the field for 3 years? Pick the person who's going to write a better letter for you.
Okay. And what about this thing where some people are having the students write the letter? Do you think that person should be somebody, you stick with, or should you just try to maybe get somebody else to do it that'll actually write it themselves? I know that's kind of like, I don't know.
I've had that experience when I was undergrad. I didn't have that experience when I was in med school. I do remember going to Dr. Lee and was like, hey, like this attending like wrote my letter in like a week. I don't know that it's good. But I mean, I would have a conversation with that person and maybe like ask like, is it that they're writing it to get to understand like what skills you have and what you would say about yourself, or are they going to just copy and paste it? I think is the other question. And if it's more like a copy and paste, I would maybe reconsider unless you write yourself a really good letter recommendation. I don't know. Dr. Lee, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have not heard of medical school faculty asking the students to actually just flat out write the letter. Certainly, giving some information that could be great material for a letter is a good idea. But I have done that as a faculty member, where I had to get letters for things, and other attendings, said to me, well, look, can you just write it? And you'll know what, it needs to say, and then just send it to me and I'll edit it. And yeah, so that is a thing. But it is kind of like an awkward thing a little bit, right? Because it's hard to, toot your own horn,
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't happened to me yet, but I've heard of a few people I know that have had it happen. So I was just like, in case it does, I just wanted to know like what to kind of do from there.
Interesting. I mean, the one good thing is what's in the letter, unlike pretty much all the other letters which you've waived your right to. Who knows what people have written? So
that's true. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're gonna ask another question. So, have you started ERAS yet? Okay, a few more seconds. If more people want to answer. All right, gonna close it. So most people have started ERAS. So for those that have not, I would highly suggest opening at least an account tonight and filling out the demographic section. It's very, very easy to say that you got started and to kind of get over that hump. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I think I have one more question before we go to Sumana. So of those who have started ERAS, has anyone completed it or like done a first draft of ERAS? Okay. Alrighty, so this is the result. And I think this is normal, right? I think the biggest thing is just kind of getting started and working on it. I know last time we kind of spoke a little bit about it. We talked about maybe starting with just the completion of your CV. Oh, sorry, I didn't share the results. Here it is. I'm getting used to all of this polling things. So I think this is like normal. Remember, we'll talk about, kind of like a timeline and kind of thing of that. But kudos for the one person who's like completed like a first draft out of the game. But otherwise, you're like kind of where you're supposed to be. You have time. All right. Any questions about that? All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is ERAS. And Sumina is going to talk about that.
So I will do my best to talk about this. I have not looked or thought about ERAS since I got into residency. So please, Amy and Ryan, fill in anything that I miss. In terms of, so I think, and of course Ryan did the like PowerPoint. She basically did all the work, and I'm just showing here and talking a little bit. And I guess just to make sure that, just a couple things to point out that Ryan wrote on the slide already. If you have are part of any professional societies, like those are really important, especially, right? Like if you're part of AFP and you're applying for family medicine, it's good to be like, hey, I'm part of AFP. Like that's good to know. Any awards, if your school does AOA, for example, saying that you're AOA, or if you have gold GHHS, then you should put that as well. And honestly, I think put anything where you had like a real experience with. If you volunteered once at some random food pantry, don't put it on there. I don't really think it's worthwhile. And then I think the only other thing, I'm not sure what Ryan meant with the CV comment, so I'm going to let her explain that. Did you mean like going from there to a CV or going from a CV to there?
Starting from a CV to ERAS.
Got it. And I'm going to let you fill in any other details that you wanted to highlight on here because I wasn't entirely sure.
Adrian had an interesting point. I would like for you to tell us a little bit more. You said you found ERAS as a good source for information about programs. How are you using that?
So when you go to search for programs that you're going to save, like actually this slide is showing that you can do that. Mm-hmm. So they have information, some more information about the programs. I think they might have things like how big the program is and just different demographics of their resident classes and stuff. It's been a few weeks since I was in there poking around because I was more focused on conference and the class I was in at the moment. But things like scores and things that program, like their average scores of their applicants and things like that first up. And so just kind of an idea to see like, well, who are the people that they typically, accept, and to just one more parameter for me to see, like, should I be looking in this program or not?
Cool. I don't think I used that feature, but that's good to know. And I think just showing this, like, looking on the application, like you all could finish 3 of these tonight. Your personal information, your biographic information, your education information. Like that could be done and you can just check. I think the most time that we spend on this really is the experience part. And that's just kind of, determining what activities is best to include, not include, and what to say about them. So I think when you start from a CV, it's helpful because you kind of have everything in front of you and then you can kind of just pick and then you transfer. And then like the document section is just showing you like the letter of recommendations that have been uploaded. That's where you also put your personal statement. And you can upload multiple personal statements and assign them to a particular program. And then the photo is something else you can do. I don't know how it's working now, but I'm sure I went to I think JCPenney's and used a Groupon and got a picture done. So the only thing I have to say about the photo is that it should be professional. So anything else you have to add, Dr. Lee, about ERAS in particularly?
I think a lot of schools also offer to take photos for students. So that's something worth checking with your school because just more expense or more having to go somewhere and be exposed to COVID. So maybe check with the school if you, yeah. Simona says that's what they did there. So, just a plain background and someone with a decent camera, that's basically all you need. And then we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but you may have multiple versions of your personal statement, which is why it's helpful in that documents to see the different versions or why you would have more than one. And it's not because you're going to write 5 totally different ones, but because you may customize them for specific programs, especially if they ask for additional information that should be addressed in the personal statement, which some programs do. So just to be aware that you might end up with 5 or 6 slightly different personal statements because of that.
And like Ryan had mentioned, try to break. It's like very overwhelming to look at all of this at one time and be like, oh my God, I have so many pieces to do. But if you break it up into smaller pieces, it's not too bad. So, I mean, it depends on if you're a planner or not a planner, but maybe for those of you who are planners, you could be like, okay, in the next couple of days, I'm going to work on these couple sections. And then I'm going to give myself like a week to work on the experiences section because I know that's going to take me a long time to go through all the stuff that I've done. So it's just something else to think about. Or maybe you're the person who just does everything the night or two before, which is fine, right? Everyone functions differently. But like, just figure out like if you're going to be overwhelmed, like trying to do all of this at once with a short amount of time. And if that is going to be you, try to space out how you get through all of this stuff.
Yeah. And I would say even for the ERAS, at least have like one academic person maybe look at it. Okay. Any other questions about ERAS before we move on to personal statement?
I have a random question. What does categorical mean under training name? Like I see training name, then I see family medicine on some, but then I see categorical, and I thought, is that like the transitional year thing, or what is?
Is that what that is? I think so. Yes, I've heard that. I don't know, Dr. D, do you know? I've never had to do it.
Yeah, sorry, categorical, is that what someone was asking what that is?
Yeah,
it's like a transitional year, like a general intern year that you have to do before certain other programs. So you match to a categorical year and then you match to, an orthopedic surgery year or, something else. So sometimes there's some combinations like that. Not for family medicine.
Yeah, that's why I'm confused because I clicked family, like I filtered out family, and it says family under specialty. It's just under training name, it says categorical. But under all of these, under training type, they all say categorical. So maybe it's just a glitch or something.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, it's weird. So I think maybe that's just like a error because I know this program isn't like a prereq to something. So I guess it's maybe an error. I just was wondering, was I interpreting it correctly?
I don't know.
It's the only one like that, so maybe it's just weird. Okay, don't worry about it. Thank you.
Lorenzo had a question about how long should the experience entries be. My recommendation is short, sweet, but so that the reader knows what you did. And I like details, like trying to be specific as possible about what you contributed to the experience and what you learned from the experience. Do you have any other recommendations about like how long, Simona or Dr. Lee?
I would just say like a couple sentences and make sure you're highlighting the really important stuff. This is not a place to be fluffy. Like be fluffy in your personal statement. Don't be fluffy here. Yeah.
And then Adrian had a good point, which I'm not. I know that there's the whole merge thing of like DO and MD programs. So are there some programs that are only for DOs, or can anyone apply to any of them, any program? Do you know about this, Dr. Lee?
Yeah, Amy, I feel like you'd be the best person to answer this question.
Yeah, I think there's been a change recently, and I can look into it more when we talk about other things, and I'll get back to you shortly. But it used to be that there were some programs that were only Osteopathic Association accredited, so only a DO could go. And then there were programs that, you know, could be either MD or DO. And I don't think there were ever programs that were MD only. But I feel like there may have been a change. So let me investigate while we're talking about other things, and I'll get back to you.
I think I can answer. Oh, somebody else.
I was just gonna say, I think that everyone can apply. My school has some affiliated residency programs, and they became ACGME accredited like 2 or 3 years ago. And they have MD. Some of them can choose to learn OMT, like for their family or for their internal program. They have a track that I think you can apply. There's just some programs that have osteopathic recognition.
Yeah, last year was the official merger. Like this class that just matched, so like there's no limit on the applications anymore. It's just, you know, however people want to take things.
Yeah.
That sounds right. That's what I thought had happened, but I didn't want to say for sure if I didn't know, but that sounds exactly right. So.
Okay. So I have another poll because we're going to be moving towards personal statements. So the question is, have you started a personal statement? All right, I'm going to end the poll, share the results. A lot of people have started a personal statement, which is great. I think for me, this was the thing that I procrastinated on the most because I don't love writing. So kudos to you guys. All right, so I'll go to the next slide. About personal statements. Dr. Lee, can you lead on the personal statements aspect?
Absolutely. While we were away for a second, I just took a quick look, and you're exactly right. The integration of the AOA and the ACGME accreditation for family medicine residencies was complete as of June of this year, actually. So it just happened that it's fully integrated and it's all the same. So cool. Okay, personal statements, yes. So the tricky part about personal statements that's specific to family medicine is that unlike some other specialties where they really want kind of a formulaic personal statement, like paragraph 1, why I'm going to be a radiation oncologist. Paragraph 2, what I've done to find out that I want to be a radiation oncologist. Paragraph 3, where I want to train to be a radiation oncologist, right? Like there's a very formulaic kind of thing, which you may have heard from your medical school as well. But for family medicine, you know, we're rebels. So we don't like too much formulaic stuff. So really, family doctors are really interested in stories and your story. So that's why the personal statement is trickier, but cooler than other specialties, because people really read them and they really want to learn about you as a person and not just read something relatively formulaic. So the great thing is it's a great chance to talk about yourself and your experiences, what's important to you, what's motivated you, and how that all kind of ties into why family medicine is right for you. But it doesn't need to be just focused on family medicine as a specialty. It should be much more about you as a person. So that's why I love where Ryan has put here, tell the story, tell your story, right? So you're gonna, you know, talk about some of these things, but you don't have to feel like that's the only thing you can talk about. The other good thing about a personal statement is it's a great place to talk about things which might make programs nervous for any reason, such as time that was taken off either between college and medical school, or between medical school, like within the years, or time off in medical school, or any red flags, which would be something like a board failure or course failure, or something like that, like a professionalism violation or something like that. Because these are things that it's better to get out in the open and explain in the best possible light as part of kind of a journey, right, that someone has taken, than not to address it and then having someone from a program look through the information, see the flag, be like, nope, and not even consider. So that's why it can be a really great benefit to use the personal statement for those things. It should definitely be brief it should not be longer than a page. And every year people are like, well, but if I squeeze it into 9-point font, you know, I can I get it. Don't go too crazy. You know, most people are going to read the personal statement in approximately 2 minutes. So you want them to absorb as much as possible in that 2 minutes of what you're really trying to say. So just say the most important things, the most memorable things, and also talk about the stuff that you want to talk about with the programs, because it seems like inevitably when you go for interviews, things in the personal statement are often brought up as jumping off points for the interviews. And so if you pick something that was kind of like, well, I thought this might make a good personal statement, but you're not that excited about it, you're going to have a really sad interview season, having to talk about this thing again and again. Whereas if it's the thing that you love the most in life, you could talk about it for hours, you're all set. You're going to have a great interview season. So those are things to consider. Definitely you should have people proofread it and proofread your drafts, both for grammar and spelling, but also just, you know, does this sound like me? Does this sound more like me than someone else? You know, could you pick this out of a group of 5 or 10 personal statements and know it's mine? Right? So those kinds of things. And I love that Ryan's put, you know, have multiple people look at it, a personal friend, at least one family doc, and then, yeah, anyone from like dean's office, you know, English professor, career support, like anything. Yeah, great. Any of those would be fantastic.
The one comment I will add to that is don't then send it to like too many people. Like don't send it to like 10 people, because I may or may not have made that mistake. And then I was like super overwhelmed with like, whose advice do I take? Whose advice don't I take? Right. Because some of this is also very personal. Right. And so I think it's definitely a good idea to give it to a few different people to look at, but don't do the mistake of like that I did and give it to like 10 people and then not know like what I'm supposed to do with all this feedback that I got.
Also, to that point, you don't have to take everybody's feedback. Like, it's your personal statement at the end of the day. So it's like you can pick and choose. Don't feel like, you know, oh, like this person is, you know, in this position, it must be right. It is still your personal statement.
So that's why I think you should be really good about like who you're picking to read it, right? Because if you maybe don't like, or maybe not value, I can't think of the right word, but if you feel like you're going to get feedback from that person, you're not going to like take it seriously, maybe just not, that's also not the person to give it to. But yes, like also like you can get the feedback and be like, no, I don't agree with you, I'm going to do this anyways. So
yeah, and the reality is none of the people you send it to are going to actually end up seeing the final copy anyway, unless you share it with them. So it's not as if, you know, you ask your department chair to review it and then you say like that advice was horrible, that somehow they're going to read it later. They're never going to see it. So you're not going to offend anyone. Just, it's all just for you to be helpful to you. So yeah. And then the last item here is what I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is some programs ask for specific questions or issues to be addressed in the personal statement. So I agree the easiest way to do this is just to add on to your current personal statement. So you have your regular, you know, personal statement version A, and then under that, if there were additional questions, you just put additional questions, number 1, and just answer the question no more than a paragraph per question. Again, brevity, you know, for each one. And then you're going to label this new creation, you know, personal statement, program B, you know, or whatever it is specific to that program. And that's the personal statement you'll assign to that program when you apply. If a program doesn't ask for anything specific, you're going to send, you know, personal statement version A, right? That doesn't have any extra stuff. And then if it asks for specific stuff, you'll have a specifically made one. Yeah, you can also do like an additional paragraph if there aren't multiple questions, if it makes more sense to just kind of add on some additional information to what the program's asking you to do. So I would just say, look at what they're asking and just be sure that you are very obviously following directions. Because what often happens is the programs that ask for this additional information, a significant number of people who apply don't do it. And so, you know, already just following directions, you're ahead of the game. But you want to make it obvious that you knew they wanted something and that, you know, you're addressing what they're asking. So that's why I think it's nice to say like additional requested information, you know, to label it like, I know you wanted extra stuff, here it is, you know, kind of thing. Instead of trying to somehow integrate the answers to what they wanted to know into your already made personal statement, which is hard, but also may not obviously show that actually you're addressing what they're asking you to do as obviously. So let me see, is there something in the chat? Let's see. Yeah, is there a good way to mention the red flag? So ideally, it would kind of weave into the theme of your personal statement, such as, you know, maybe it's about lifelong learning, you know, maybe is the focus of your personal statement. And so then this experience where, you know, there came a course or a situation where, you know, someone who's been generally successful, you know, throughout life has then experienced failure, and how much of an education, you know, having this failure was, and overcoming and finding new ways to do things that, you know, hadn't been needed before, perseverance, asking for help when needed, like all things that residencies want to know their residents are willing to do, right? Because residency is hard. So having a student say, look, I had something happen, and when it happened, I realized I needed help, and here's all the things I did to get help, and then here's how I overcame it, and here's what I learned. And so going forward, if I encounter a situation like that again, I'll be able to recognize it sooner and make, you know, corrections sooner so that I won't have a problem like this. That's actually, you know, a great way to talk about a red flag. Yeah, and sometimes people, faculty will say, well, don't mention the red flag, don't say anything. But again, I think the worry there is then a program happens to see it in the ERAS, as far as, you know, the transcript or whatever else where you would see it. And if there isn't any mention about it in the rest of the application, they just pass that applicant over and don't invite them to interview. So that's the worry there. What else, Ryan or Simona?
There's another slide about personal statements, where to start. I felt like I included this for myself. I don't remember if you remember this, Dr. Lee, but I was just so scared to start. I have really bad writing anxiety. And so I had to like break it down for myself. I was one of those people where like in my mind, I like had this, you know, unrealistic expectation. I was just gonna sit down and write my whole personal statement all at once. And then I realized that no, that's not gonna happen. And I had to kind of like really break it down. So this is kind of like my thought process. And so I'm like open to hear like how other people are finding the process to be. I had to really take it back to like elementary school, and I like basically used the diagram like this, and I was like, what is it that I want to convey? Like, what is the theme? What is like my principle? I felt like for me, like residency application journey was really a journey and like reflecting on what type of doctor I wanted to be. And it was, I don't know, it was very deep for me. And so I kind of started right in the center, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be my theme. And I would randomly sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and have an idea, and I would write it down, and then I would like draw, like, how does this fit in? And so this is kind of my process, especially for some of the people maybe that haven't started yet or may have writing anxiety. Just kind of doing it as you go along, and then also still setting aside that time and saying, okay, maybe I'm going to do like 30 minutes a day, or tomorrow I'm going to do like, 15 minutes, and just kind of not putting a lot of pressure, but being very thoughtful about it at the same time. So those are for people that were like me. Anybody have questions about personal statements?
There's a question about putting the red flag in the personal statement or in the noteworthy characteristics. I'm not sure where that section is. Is that part of the CV type portion, like in the experiences portion, or where would that be?
student noteworthy characteristic is a part of our dean's letter, the MSPE?
Okay. So yeah, definitely your dean's letter should hopefully address anything that could be conceived of as a red flag in actually much more detail, probably than what you might even go into in your personal statement or anything like that. Because, for example, if you take a year off, like sometimes students take a year off for illness or a family issue or something like that, often the dean's letter will say, you know, this student's an exemplary student who, because of family emergency, you know, needed to take a set amount of time off. There was no, you know, professionalism issue or academic issue. It was purely because of the situation. And then, you know, when coming back from this leave, you know, they had to jump right back into this course and, you know, struggled a little bit, or, you know, whatever it was, but, you know, understandably given, like, here are the circumstances. So definitely the dean's letter, ideally, like the deans should be your advocate, you know, in explaining and giving more detail to kind of the whole person that is you and like the whole educational journey. So yes, hopefully all that should be made very clear in the dean's letter. Should a red flag be addressed in the leave of absence or in the personal statement? So if the red flag was a leave of absence, then you would mention it in the leave of absence section. But oftentimes there are other things that weren't necessarily a leave of absence. And so again, mentioning it in the personal statement is an option. I wouldn't say it's absolutely necessary. I don't think you 100% have to do it. But a lot of programs and program directors will say to us, you know, when we meet with them, like as advisors to the program directors, like, what will help us make sure our students have the best you know, footing for applications? The program directors will tell us, look, just have the students tell us about, you know, if there are any red flags, like tell us about it, so that we don't have to worry about it or just imagine like what might have happened. So I think it's a personal decision, but something to consider anyway.
Something's wrong with my chat, so I can't actually see anything. It won't pop up if I So thank you, Dr. Lee, for keeping up with the chat. All right. So I am going to, so the next part is actually I'm sharing basically just the introduction and conclusion of my personal statement. And maybe we can just have like thoughts on it, or, you know, kind of break it apart, or what are some things that you noticed, or what were things that you felt like stood out. And I felt that this was helpful when I was also applying, to just kind of think of like, what does, you know, a personal statement look like for some people, and just remember this is like my own personal story, so it might like look very different for other people. Okay. So I will give you all a few minutes, like 2 minutes, to kind of read that to yourselves. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts of things that maybe stood out, or No. Well, I'll give you my intake. I think in editing my personal statement after a few drafts, I remember there was at least 4 or 5 drafts. Something that was very important for me was to look at each sentence and ask myself, like, what does this add? And so I was trying to be very purposeful in my personal statement. So, and then, like I said, I really did go back to like elementary school writing, and I tried to make sure there was somewhat like an introductory sentence and a conclusion sentence. And for me, like talking about community, the community in which I grew up in, the community in which I serve. So some of my body is about community service and how I developed as a leader, and then kind of how that fits in with being a physician. But something particularly important for me is my family. And so I felt like that was something that I wanted to include in my personal statement. Um, so that's kind of how I opened my personal statement. I know somebody unmuted. Did they have any questions or like comments or thoughts?
I just wanted to mention that I love your personal statement. Reading the first paragraph reminded me of your whole personal statement, Ryan. But what I love so much about it is it's so vivid when I read it. Like I can picture everything that you're describing. Unlike, say, a sentence or two, which might say, you know, I lived with an extended family. I had a great grandmother who was ill, so I cared for her. You know, like it's the same information, but it doesn't at all have the same impact as this kind of storytelling does. So it's just something to keep in mind as you start crafting, you know, your story. It can start with a few basic sentences, but then trying to make the story as vivid as possible is great.
Mm-hmm. And I would say a lot of people, when you mention about going into interviews, like people would talk about Granny, like as if they knew her. And I was just like, okay. So it definitely was a talking point for interviews.
And Brianna also wrote in the chat that like your story made her realize that she needs to go into more detail with her story. Just to keep you informed of what's going on in the chat.
Yes, please. Thank you. Because I really can't see. I don't know what happened. Yeah, and I think that's the purpose of this, right? Because sometimes it's hard to kind of realize, like, you know, how much in depth do you go? And literally, like, my personal statement was 4 paragraphs, and that was it. So I really did try to keep it to a page. And then, so the other example is kind of like the conclusion of my personal statement. I think, you know, when we're writing, we always talk about um, you know, what kind of doctor we want to be, but I think that's important to keep that in mind. But I think something to remember is that you're applying to residency and kind of focusing on the type of resident that you're going to be too, right? So I try to keep those like things and try to balance them in my conclusion. So this was the conclusion statement. So I'll give you a few minutes to read that. Okay. Any feedback or thoughts about the conclusion?
Well, it definitely summarizes why you want to go into family medicine and what you want to do in the future, which you said is good for your conclusion. I have like one quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So I also in my conclusion right now, I'm talking about how I want to work in an underserved community. So basically, that means when I apply to residency, right, all of my programs should be within an underserved community, or I should take that out, right? If that makes sense.
I don't think it necessarily means that. I think, you can talk about the goal in which you want to aspire to. And I would say that because some programs will realize like maybe they're not in the underserved community necessarily, but they offer skills or experiences that you can basically apply to working in an underserved community. Or perhaps they may look in that and say, well, a lot of our, residents might go into like academics or may not necessarily have that focus, and you can bring something new to that, especially if you're talking about the experiences that you may have had or that you hope to build on, and they may see it from that aspect. So I wouldn't say that you should change that at all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. Almost all communities of patients have at least some population within that is underserved, even if you wouldn't say the entire patient population is underserved. And so someone who's looking through a lens of specifically serving the underserved or meeting unmet needs could do amazing things for a particular population of patients, I think, anywhere. I mean, most residencies in family medicine have a significant population of underserved patients anyway. I think it would be somewhat unusual to find a residency that didn't. I don't think there's any need to worry about that.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions about personal statements? Okay, so I just wanted to kind of come back again to the resources that some of which we had talked about last time. And I think Sumana, you'll talk about the next few slides, and then we'll have like just an open Q&A. Can you talk about next steps, Sumana?
Yes, sorry about that. Okay, so the things that you want to, the upcoming things, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, right? You want to make sure you're finishing up your ERAS. And I mean, you have a few weeks to do that. Wait, couple weeks? 2.5 weeks. I mean, you have a while to do that, but if you can try to get it in by September 1st, I think it's good. The earlier you can get in your application, I think the better. You should be thinking about like what programs, that you want to send your application to. Maybe look back at your list that maybe you made from national conference, and think back like, how many of these programs do I actually want to apply to? And Amy actually might be better in terms of speaking to how many programs you should be applying to. I don't know, Amy, if you want to offer any advice in terms of how many programs they should be applying to.
Yeah, there's some rule of thumbs about that, but then there's also a more personalized approach. So I would say in general, something in the 12 to 20 range is fine, but it depends is the actual answer, because it's really depending on the individual. So if, for example, we are near Boston, so we have a lot of students who want to stay in the area. And so, we know the 10 or 12 programs that are basically, in the area. So someone who wants to stay geographically here, those programs are plenty, 10 or 12 programs if you want to be within an hour or two of Boston, it's probably plenty. unless there's a red flag or something else in someone's application that might mean they're less likely to get an interview, and then we might expand the list a little bit. Whereas if someone's applying in Seattle and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Houston and Philadelphia, you know, a bunch of different geographic locations, sometimes you might end up with a larger program list. It might be 25 or something like that. And then again, if there are any kind of red flags or anything along those lines, or if you look at the information with your dean's office, similar students from your school with similar grades and activities and board scores, how they've done applying to certain programs, and then that might be helpful too, or your family medicine advisor might know that from your school, whether that means you need a slightly longer list or a slightly shorter list. So I would say, you know, there's a general rule of thumb. I mean, I would say the ideal thing is you're aiming for about 10 to 12 interviews, but to know how many places you have to apply to secure 10 to 12 interviews, you might need additional advice from mentors and deans and such from your exact school. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
That was great. Thanks, Amy. And then hopefully by this time, right, like you've already figured out who you want your letter writers to be. And if you haven't reached out to people, definitely make sure you do that. And at least start working on a rough draft of your personal statement. And it seems like a lot of you guys have at least started doing that, which is great. And then Amy, or I, of course, because I'm not applying right now, I don't remember, like, when do letters have to be in from, like, you know, from the writers that you requested? Is that by October 1st? I don't remember.
There isn't a hard date, but ideally you want the letters in so that everything is uploaded and sent to the programs, so that at the date at which programs can start reviewing applications, everything is complete. That's really ultimately the goal. So all the letters are in, you know, all scores if possible, you know, in the time of COVID, but for step 2 are in, the ERAS is in, you know, and you've finalized your list of programs to apply to, ideally, so that they're getting all the information the first day that the programs are able to download their applications. Because sometimes what happens, and this happens, but sometimes a week or 2 after the programs start downloading information, you realize, oh my gosh, there's this other program that sounds amazing, I should apply there. And so then you package something up and you send it to them, but they already have 1,000 applications in their queue to review that, you know, were available the first day. And so you are application 1001. So it's going to be a while before they get to yours. So it's just, you know, to be in the best possible position, everything should be in and ready to go by the time programs can look at it.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah. So
I would add, sorry, Sumina, about the
go
date,
ahead.
is that even though September 1st is the first day that you can submit, don't do it if you're not ready. So definitely take your time and make sure that you have put a well thought out package and application together, but also don't procrastinate trying to make the perfect application either. I feel like I was kind of more like, oh my gosh, everything has to be perfect, da, da, da. And I tried to I submitted the first day, but I felt like that was something that I was focused on or thought of. So I would just it's a balance.
Yeah, sorry, that was my bad. I completely forgot that it opened on the 1st, and clearly Ryan wrote it on the slide too, but residencies don't start downloading it until the 21st of October, so you have time. And I did not mean to stress anybody out if I stressed anybody out when I said that. And I know Brianna asked a question about how interviews are going to be held, and I can tell you, at least from our program, we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do that. So I don't think all programs are going to have, I still think programs are figuring out what they want to do. But I also don't want to add to your stress. So I think in terms of the interviews and stuff, I think programs are still trying to figure out what they're going to look like. and I bet every program is going to be doing something differently, whether it's an all-day event or not. So I would just stay tuned to see what programs tell you. And how many interviews are typically held in 1 week? So it depends program to program. At Lawrence, we were interviewing 3 times a week, but again, like that could completely change this year. I don't know what that's going to look like in terms of COVID. And in terms of like when you go to interview to places, I really wouldn't do more than 2 to 3 interviews in a week. Like ideally like 1 to 2 max in a week, because it
Pretty
gets to be
pushing
very,
it. I think
yeah,
that one week I did 3 and it was not great.
yeah,
I was tired.
yeah. And I did not couples match, so I unfortunately cannot offer any advice in terms of that. Amy, do you have any couples matching advice?
Yeah, I just put a note in there, which is, talk to your dean of students or your faculty advisors, because couples matching is like a very precise maneuver with a lot of details. And you definitely want to get advice from people who've gone through it many times before. And because each couples match is totally different depending on which 2 specialties the 2 people are applying in and what regions or geographies. Just the advice is very different. So you want to get advice from experienced deans of students or other faculty advisors specific to your situation.
I think the next, this is just next sessions that we'll probably be hosting. For the MS September, we'll be talking about interviewings. We're actually going to do mock interviews at that time. Stay tuned for that. And then if there's like other things you guys want to cover, like let us know. We could try to make that work also. Yeah, questions? I'm going to stop recording right now.
I have one more question. I really appreciate y'all